All right. Let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Rucha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is All That's Left Today is Mainly Based on Faith. And pretty much this is something that I've been kind of meditating on, speaking on. A couple of nights ago, I spoke to the Elder Pishai about it. How, when Yahushai was on the scene, he was the actual proof that he is the Son of the Most High, you know. And once he was crucified, the only evidence that was left was testimony, the testimony of the men that were with him, that followed him, that actually saw him. So after Yahushua went back into the spirit world, only thing that was left on the table was faith. And today, we're at a point where information concerning the Hebrew Israelites, concerning the things that we teach, is starting to be very limited. And it's starting to be, when you look stuff up, they're starting to, redirect you to other platforms or other information that goes against the information that we've been bringing out. So, what's left is what? Is nothing more than faith, because, the information that was readily available years ago, you're not going to be able to get today. And it's like they say, the old adage, trying to find a needle in a haystack. And that's pretty much what's happening. But this is also a sifting mechanism that the Lord is using, because by this point, if not all or the majority of the elect are sealed, and the Lord just still has the truth out there for, the last bit of scragglers, or however the word is used, stragglers, the 11th hour laborers, and whatever else the case may be that the Lord has, because we're still in prophecy stage, and the main prophecy that we're waiting for hasn't fully been fulfilled yet, even though it's in the mix, dealing with the MOTB being a micro C-hip. And that's pretty much what has the rest of the prophecies in a bottleneck. Once that prophecy of the MOTB, the micro C-hip, comes to pass, then the highway for the rest of the prophecies is going to be opened up. It's no longer going to be just a one lane highway. It's going to be all lanes open, and that's going to bring the end closer and closer and quicker. Now, yesterday I did a lesson on, the 10 tribes and how they came to this side of the world, and the premise of it was with Edward King, the Viscount of Kingsborough, and his 9 volume of books. The 9th volume was pretty much compiled, because it was eight volumes from what I remember, but the 9th volume was compiled, what they say, posthumously, which means after his death. So there were notes that he still had. I guess someone that had, the power over it, was able to put together based off of his notes. So the 9th one, I'm not sure if he had put some of it together, but definitely it was something that was done posthumously, which means after his death. And it went through here and it gave you all the different facts and the conclusions that he came to, that Issacharites were Israelites based off of their customs, rituals, so on and so forth. But a lot of this information you should be able to get readily. It was readily available. Now what you're going to get is you're going to get the information, but it's also going to come with, he's not really recognized as pseudo history and this, that, and the other. So you're gonna get all of those different um, doubting statements that is going to make the majority of people that get that information doubt. They're not going to really, reach for that because they're going to say, well, it's not widely accepted, so I'm not going to accept it. And this is why the scriptures say, let's go real quick to Exodus. I believe that's 21. No, 23, I believe it is. Exodus 23:1, thou shalt not raise a false report, put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many, to wrestle or to wrest judgment. All right, so that's the bottom line. So the bottom line is, when you're, searching for the truth, you're not supposed to just go with the mainstream consensus, because mainstream is pretty much not where it's at. We go to Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13. It says, enter ye in at the straight gate. Now, when you look at the word straight here, it's not talking about straightforward. It's talking about a position of difficulty. Like you have the Straits of Hormuz and different straits where there's two bodies of land on each side close together, and there's only just enough room for a ship to navigate through at a time. And the ship, the person that's directing that ship has to be expert navigator, because if he moves too close to the left or too close to the right, he can run the ship into the ground and cause a bottleneck for the rest of the ships behind him, or cause everything to stop. So the way to get to the truth, the way to get to salvation is very narrow, very straight. Because it says, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. So if that's the case, that means that the mainstream consensus or the mainstream ideology doesn't fit the narrative of the way to salvation, because the way to salvation is not going to be accepted by many. It says, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. So we're in a stage right now that is pretty much basically all based off of faith. Either the Lord gave you the spirit to believe it or not. This is why the Apostle Paul said to the Galatians in Galatians 3, he was pretty much cursing them out because they allowed the Jews, because you had some Jews, some Pharisees that were righteous, but they were trying to put the Israelite foreigners under the yoke of the law. And this is why the Apostle Paul cursed them out. Galatians 3:1, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you, because they were not there. So the criteria, for lack of better words, for the Israelite foreigners was not based off of the keeping of the law and the evidence, of their genealogy going back to Israel, because they lost that. What it was set up on was, it was set up on their faith. So today, this is where we're at, right? So it says, this only what I learn of you. Receive you the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? So when Yahushua went back into the spirit world, they didn't have evidence that Yahushua was actually here, being able to see it with their physical eyes. But the difference was that these Israelite foreigners were given the gift of belief through the Spirit of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, through the Holy Spirit. Because, the Jews in Jerusalem actually had Yahushua there. The Israelite foreigners didn't have him there. He was there in spirit. So they either believed it or not. So this is the point, that we're at today as far as this truth is concerned. So are you so foolish, having begun in the spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? See? So there's not going to be a lot of evidence. A lot of evidence is going to be scrubbed. They're going to tell you that it's not accepted by the mainstream media, or the mainstream, these so-called schools of higher learning. And when we go through the scriptures tell us that these schools of higher learning are not regarded by the Most High. Yahweh Bashem Yahushua doesn't look at them, in the light that the world looks at them. That's why it says that the enmity of the world that the friendship of the world is enmity with the Most High. All right. So now let's go here. This is so I went through that. Then afterwards, when they were trying to cast doubt and said it was a pseudo history. So I typed in the next one that I had typed in was dealing with give me I'm sorry that and then they gave me the sightings in the volumes, certain of the volumes that the indigenous people of the Americas are Israelites. We went through some of that. Then the next question asked, because down here, right here, it says today it's recognized as a pseudo-historical idea. So pseudo-historical means a fake history. So now the evidence that he presented, right, today, these so-called historians, because it doesn't match the narrative that they've taught in these schools, they'll say it's pseudo-history, just like Trump will say it's fake news. But just because someone says it's pseudo or fake doesn't mean that it actually is. You see? So my next question was, James Adair in his book, The History of the American Indians, seems to agree with the fact that the indigenous people of America are indeed Israelites of the 10 lost tribes. Then it says, yes, that's absolutely correct. But again, in here, it pretty much gives you, it gives you truth, but it also gives you, certain phrases that can cause doubt in a person's mind. So this is why we're at the point that, as the name of the lesson is, all that's left today is mainly based on faith, because these devils are scrubbing a lot of this information off of the internet. And if they leave it, they got these so-called fact checkers that are going to say that no, it's false, it's not really true, it's that, so you're either going to believe it or you're not. And you have to remember, these two individuals, Edward King and James Adair, they were actual eyewitnesses of the ceremonies, the rituals, the religious rites, the practices, the customs of the natives that were here, on the soils of America. And they being, acquainted with the scriptures, they said, man, a lot of the stuff that these people are doing resemble, or are just like the keepings of the Israelites, the Jews, the Levites, so on and so forth. All right. So, I asked about Ronald Sanders, but I didn't really go into this yesterday. So if I see anything interesting in there, I'll go through it. So this morning when I woke up, I was thinking about these different so-called, should I say, these different European historians, antiquarians, so on and so forth in Europe that agree that you had so-called black people that ruled all throughout Europe, and once again, they'll give you certain truths, and then they'll say, well, they call it pseudo history or pseudo, like basically that the mainstream scholars and so on and so forth, and mainstream historians today really don't regard that as being authoritative. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative that has been taught of the whitewashing of the Renaissance period. See, even though you have many different frescoes and portraits and mosaics and paintings and all that show that you had so-called black people back then with woolly hair and all that, they still don't regard that, because what they'll say is, well, since it's so old, the dirt on it made them look darker. This is and then the average mind out there is not that deep, especially here in America. and they'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. Looks like somebody kind of smudged it by accident. So all that's left today is basically based off of faith. So with this truth, you either believe it or you don't, and this is the beauty of the Holy Spirit. And this is the beauty of the contrast between Yahweh Shai physically being here on the earth and them seeing him, be able to touch him, and him being gone into the spirit world. And the ones that were left of the Israelite foreigners had to believe on him based off of faith and the testimony of the men that were actually with him. You see? So what I asked, right, because if you brothers remember the name of the skit, I can't remember the name of the skit, but Elder Apostle Gabar, maybe he might remember the name of the skit. You had a series in England that was like Living Color of America. It was called The Real McCoy. There was one scene that you can't find on the internet. I mean, you can't find on YouTube anymore. I actually got the video downloaded up top, on my computer. You can't find it anywhere. But it was these Jakes that came into this this office where you had this Edomite dude sitting behind the office, a representative of Britain, and they were called the comedians, and they broke it down, something about the original man, boom, 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 they were breaking it down, and they were quoting different historians back then that actually gave, that showed evidence that there were so-called black people ruling throughout Europe and the nobilities and all that. But now when you look it up, they're not giving you much information on it. Or they're saying that it's not, accurate, and he was a bug out and this, that, and the other. And, the information is, very, it's just, he's just reaching. So everything today is based off of faith. So if you brothers, any of you happen to remember the name of that skit from, The Real McCoy, if you could post it up, because there were other historians that I can't remember their names, but I just happen to remember one of them. So I asked the chat, besides historian David McRitchie, so he was one of the ones that they mentioned. David McRitchie says that the original English rulers were black, so-called black. What other European historians said that black people ruled Europe? So this is what the chat said. I couldn't locate credible. Yeah, it's a classic show. I just can't remember the name of that particular skit. I couldn't locate credible evidence of mainstream European historians other than David McRitchie, who explicitly argued that black people ruled Europe in the manner you described. Example given that Europe was fundamentally governed by black rulers, and that is the truth. And you do have, a coat of arms, because I later on I mentioned that, and then they're saying, well, this individual, yeah, he has credible sources, but that was just, he really didn't know how to identify and blah. So it's like they're just casting doubt on all of the evidence that's out there. And the chat is run by, by the mini caps. I'm positive of that. I don't have the evidence, but I'm positive of that because they own all the mainstream media and everything. So they're gonna, set it up to the point where it's gonna, be more favorable to them than it would be to anyone else. So it says McRitchie's thesis. See, they come already with thesis, which thesis is a theory, but it's not a theory because he had evidence of it. There were other historians that spoke about it, but I couldn't find the rest of the names because, in that skit in The Real McCoy, they ran down different historians. David McRitchie was one of them. I think one of them was called Guy something, but it gave a whole list of them that gave, through their research found out that the people that ruled so-called Europe were so-called black, which were Israelites. And that goes along with prophecy. And that goes along with the beast having a deadly wound as it were unto death, and then coming back into power later on. So for that period of time when the beast had the wound, you had Jake that was ruling. And when you understand the history of Rome, and how you had these different emperors, and the last ruling dynasty of the Roman Empire of the Edomites was the Flavian dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Once Domitian went down and Nerva took over, these were all Israelites, so-called Negroes, that were ruling Europe from that point all the way up until the Renaissance, beginning in the 1300s, which was the beginning of stages of it. But the height of it was roughly around 1453 to 1492 and above. And this was the great time of deception. So when these different historians found these things out, how these people were swarthy, and they were, black people with kinky hair, so on and so woolly hair, so on and so forth, and they gave these testimonies and wrote books about it. Now all of a sudden today they're not true, because for a long time the truth had been hidden. Let's get a couple of precepts on that, and then we'll read some more. This is the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 5. These are some of my favorites to go to. 2nd Ezra, chapter 5. But let me get this other precept that just came to mind. Let me get two of them. 1 and 2. See, because one thing you cannot get around is you cannot get around prophecy. Prophecy trumps everything. So let's go to 2nd Ezra chapter 5 and 1. Nevertheless, as concerning the tokens, when you read the book form, it says concerning the tokens, behold, the days shall come, that they which dwell upon earth shall be taken in a great number, and the way of truth shall be hidden. Why? Because this was a part of prophecy, to where the Israelites would fall, and then Esau would get back into power during the Renaissance period. And the very first thing they did at that time was to deceive the whole world by putting up their faces. That's why it says the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. So not only did they cover up the faces of Yahweh, Yahushai, the angels, the Israelites, they put their faces up. And also when you try to find justice, they don't give you justice, because the wicked are in authority. So they're going to give themselves more justice than they would anyone else. So it says, and the way of truth shall be hidden, and the land shall be barren of faith. All right. So now let's go to the next chapter, 2nd Ezra 6 and 28, another one of my favorites. As for faith, it shall flourish. Why? Because the truth would be brought out. But as we read in Matthew the 7th chapter, it would be straight. It would be narrow. Not many people will accept it. So the mainstream ideology, the mainstream teachings would go contrary to what the scriptures, and the truth would bring out. Because the truth would be very precious in these times. Elder Apostle Gabar always says that the truth is precious, because it's not readily open to everybody. Even though we're teaching it, we're spreading it out. The gospel is going to be preached to the four corners of the earth, but the majority of people on the planet are not going to accept it, because it goes contrary to what's been taught in the history books, and it's been so ingrained and seared into the conscience of the people that they can't see anything else besides that. So it takes a very special spirit for the Lord to tap into that spirit, to be able to remove the old mindset and give them the new mindset to be able to see the truth. That's why it says when the beast would come back into power and a deadly wound was healed, it said the whole world wondered after the beast. So they were in amazement. We were all in that web at one time until the Lord pulled us out by his truth. All right. So it says, as for faith, it shall flourish, corruption shall be overcome, and the truth which hath been so long without fruit shall be declared. And that's where we're at right now. So Isaiah 25 and 7 says, and he, meaning the Most High, will destroy or destructure or take apart the platform in this mountain, America. Mountain represents, sometimes it represents an actual mountain, but in this case, it's symbolic for a government. When you get these governments together, the G7, G8, and the top governments of the planet, when they come together in a meeting, it's called a summit. What is a summit? A summit is the top of a mountain, the very peak of a mountain. So when these governments get together, that is the peak or the highest point of all of these different countries coming together. So the Lord said that he will destroy in this mountain singular, which is America, the face of the covering cast over all people, because there has been a lie that's been covered, that has, been smeared on the planet. And it came through the Renaissance period. And this is why when you deal with Christianity, so-called Christianity as we know it today, not in the ancient world, not in 2,000 years ago, but the modern day one, it's nothing more than white supremacy. It's whitewashed Christianity. It's the Christianity of deception. It's not the original. It's another gospel, another doctrine. It says, and the veil that is spread over all nations. And why is that being done? Because the Lord shined his light upon the world, and the elect started to wake up to this, because everyone else is not going to get it. The majority of the world, even though the light is shining brighter than it has ever shined ever, and the evidence is there, the understanding is so prevalent, it's so bright, but only the ones that are meant to get it are going to receive it, and the rest are going to be wallowing in darkness. Isaiah 61, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. That's why, the darkness, or that veil that has been pulled over all the world has been stripped from the minds of the elect. It says, for behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. Right. But what is the Lord doing? Through his truth, through his prophets, he's shining his light, his truth, and that truth is dismantling, deconstructing the lies that have been pushed by Esau. But Esau, since he pushed the lies, he's going to fight tooth and nail to keep those lies going. So he controls all forms of media. So when it comes to the internet, when you type certain things in that you were able to get quickly back in the days, they're going to say, well, no, the fact checkers said that this is not true. This is pseudo history. This is pseudographical. This is this, that, and the other. It's not, actual. It's not recognized by the mainstream historians and mainstream scholars. But so what? The truth is not going to be accepted by most anyway. So we're in good hands. So today, when you're trying to look for certain information, you're not going to find it as easy as you would back in the days. Now, you do have some brothers that the Spirit works with in that fashion, and they're very, very good fact checkers. They're very, very good at what they do. The Spirit works with them, brothers, and they'll find the information that they need. But not everyone has that gift, So pretty much this truth is pretty much based strictly off of faith. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. So let me get one more, and then we'll go back to this is Romans 8. We'll go back to the chat. Romans 8:24. It says, for we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. And what is that? That hope is for salvation through faith. And in the meantime, breaking down these strongholds through the truth of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, and breaking down the lies, that cheap veneer, that smear that Esau put upon the world to make them believe a lie. And the ones that are not going to make it of Israel, they're going to be wallowing in that delusion, because the Lord sent them strong delusion. So there's actual angel. When you're trying to teach somebody, an Israelite, and they can't get it, you have to remember that there's an actual angel there that's blocking them from receiving this truth, that's keeping them blinded on purpose, because the Lord doesn't want them to wake up. And that's what makes this truth even more and more precious, and it makes you, be more and more grateful to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, that wow, no matter how you put it, no matter how, well you put it together and break it down, you still have people out there that can't get it and won't get it. And the Lord allowed us to receive it because it's a gift. Heavy. Beautiful. Second Ezra 7:34. But judgment only shall remain, truth shall stand, and faith shall wax strong. Beautiful, beautiful. And that's a bad chapter too. Second Ezra 7. All right, so let's go back to the chat. So it goes on to say, I couldn't locate credible evidence of mainstream European historians other than David McRitchie, who explicitly argued that black people ruled Europe in the manner you describe. Example given, or an example, that Europe was fundamentally governed by black rulers. McRitchie's thesis, see, they threw that on there, that ancient Britons were black and that dark-skinned people dominated parts of Britain and Scandinavia is widely regarded today as pseudo-historical. By who? By the ones that have lied to the world. You know, if you control the narrative and then you control the mainstream of everything, and if somebody comes and brings something contrary to what you're teaching, of course you're going to call it pseudo or fake, because it destroys, even though you have evidence. Here are a few related figures, titles, and why they don't quite match your query. So it says related thinkers works. Joel Augustus Rogers, which is J.A. Rogers, though not strictly European historian, argued in works like 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro that many historical figures, including in Europe, had African ancestry. Edward Scobie, born 1918, wrote Black Britannia, A History of Blacks in Britain, 1972, documenting Afro-European presence and influence, but he did not claim that black people ruled Europe broadly in the way the query suggests. Right, because they did, but it's not something that's readily known. It's not something that's readily available. You have to dig in, you know, and this is why, going back to One West, you had the seven and the two main high priests back then, as their title was, that were digging into that the Byzantine, history was Yeshaya and Kazakh. And they brought out a lot of amazing information of how Jake ruled all throughout, and then you have, flags of Sardinia, flags of, I believe it was Malta and other places where the Moors ruled, and it shows their pictures and their faces on flags and on, and on different crescents and all that, shields. But then they'll say, well, no, that doesn't mean that. That's just a depiction that states that the Christians conquered those Moors. It doesn't mean that they were. So it's like they're going to throw a whole lot of shade. They're going to throw a whole lot of lies on top of the truth to try to, get people to not believe it. And most people are not critical thinkers. They're very vulnerable, mentally. They don't have the mental capacity, because the Holy Spirit is not working with them to be able to see through the lies. It says some Afrocentric websites / fringe authors claim that black Africans ruled Europe from 711 to 1789. It's not black Africans, they're Israelites, so-called black Israelites, often pointing to the Moorish rule in Iberia, right? And you had a Moorish rule in Iberia, which is in Spain, Portugal, which you had, they ruled for about 800 years. The last ruler to be taken down was Boabdil, which was Muhammad the 13th, and that was Granada in 1492. All right. It says, but and then they ruled in other areas. It says, but these are not works of recognized European historians, not accepted by mainstream scholarship, right? And this is the point. It's not accepted by mainstream scholarship. But mainstream scholarship, as we read in many times, is the wisdom of this world is foolishness with the Most High. So, of course, if the truth goes against what you believe or what the lies that you've taught, you're not going to accept it. But that doesn't make it not the truth. Example given, a blog article titled "The Black Africans Who Ruled Europe from 1711 to 1789." So it says, why no others fit strictly? The claim black people ruled Europe as a general rule is almost entirely absent in serious European historiography. Right, European, this is the key, so-called white historiography, or the writings of history of Esau, because you have something called the Renaissance period, which in the Renaissance period, this was a great time of deception. as we read in Revelation chapter 20. Let's get there real quick. Excuse me, Salaki. Revelation 21. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit. The bottomless pit represents your so-called Europe, and a great chain in his hand. That great chain represents slavery, or it represents imprisonment. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. It's not talking about the spiritual demon Satan. It's talking about their counterparts on the earth, which is a group of 7 major empires. You could say 8 because there's 8 heads. 7, 8 major empires that were so-called European or Edomite empires that were ruled on the earth, beginning with the Greeks and ending with America. All right, this is what it's talking about. It's not talking about the spiritual demon Satan. All right, and bound him 1,000 years. So when you're bound, just like we're right now, we're bound by the curses. The curses are going to follow us. They're going to pursue us. They're going to overtake us till we be destroyed. So there's nothing that we could do as a people to get out of that. That's why even when Jake, makes it in society, what happens eventually? They lose everything because the curse says, "Curse shall thou be when I come us in. Curse shall thou be when I go us out." It says, "And bound him 1,000 years." That 1,000-year period began really roughly. The count starts around 325 with Constantine, but it really goes back to when the Flavian dynasty, which were Edomite Caesars that ruled, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. And once they went down, because I believe Domitian was assassinated. I don't think he took his life. I believe he was assassinated. Then you had Nerva, which was a Jake that took over. So that 1,000 years really started around there. So it's 1,000 years plus. But the Jakes that took over, they continued to rule the Roman Empire in its pagan form. Then by 325, when Constantine came in play, he made Christianity, legal in the kingdom, or in the Byzantine kingdom, or the Holy Roman Empire. That's what they call it, the Holy Roman Empire. All right, because he converted in 313 AD. And then Theodosius, which came later in 380, he made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. So, from that point on, you count 1,000 years up into the future, and that's when the Renaissance started in the 1300s. But the height, or the real, when they really got a strong foothold on so-called Europe, was from 1453 and above, 1453, 1492. And this is when they were going all throughout so-called Europe and all those different regions, Asia and all that, and destroying all the dark images through something called iconoclasm. Why? Because they were ruling and they had to erase from history, the depictions of the people that were ruling them before. But it was so much art, because you're talking about 1,000 years plus of Jake, putting up art of Yahweh Shai, the angels, the Israelites, all being so-called black people. So-called. So they weren't able to erase them all. That's why even Faithful to the Devil tried to bring out the fresco or the mosaic in Dura Europa, which cuts him, because it shows the Egyptians that were the army of the Egyptians that were drowning in the sea. They were all brown-skinned people. It showed Moses and Aaron as brown-skinned men, so on and so forth. You have depictions out there of Joseph sitting on as a pharaoh, being a so-called black man. They show you other depictions of the Israelites being slaves in Egypt, different shades of brown. So all these things destroy their narrative. So it says, "And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him." Right. And what was the seal for? That he should deceive the nations no more, because that's the devil's power. Besides deception, besides the sword, Esau's greatest weapon besides the sword is deception. That's why I said he was more subtle than any beast of the field. Till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, right? So once the 1,000 years were fulfilled, that was a prophecy. And once the last day of that came, then they were let loose. And after that, he must be loose a little season. And that little season was from the time of the Renaissance period until now. Because remember, 1,000 years with the Most High is one day. And one day is 1,000 years. So when we jump down to the 7th verse, and when the 1,000 years are expired, when that prophecy, part of the prophecy is fulfilled, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. And this took place during the time of the Renaissance period. And what did they do? And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. And that's the first thing that they did. They deceived the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. And this is why today the majority of the world still believes that so-called Jesus is a white man, that God, that so-called God is a white man, that the angels are so-called white, that the Israelites are so-called white. Why? Because this was the lie and the deception that was painted. So when you go back in the history and you look at certain historians that are not regarded by the mainstream historians, they tell the truth. So going back to the chat, it says, the claim that black people ruled Europe as a general rule is almost entirely absent in serious European historiography. Why? Because they're the ones that wrote that part of the history. So they're not going to report on something that will destroy them, their lies. Most historians either focus on African or Arab rule in part of Europe, example given the Islamic Moorish rule in Iberia, or Afro-European presence and influence, but not the black people were the dominant rulers across Europe, so-called black. Many purported references on blogs or Afrocentric sites lack rigorous sourcing, rely on contested interpretation, and mixed legend and fact. Yeah, the contested interpretations are the facts that David McRitchie and other historians brought out. Even because Elder Malcolm goes into this. Even Benjamin Franklin said that the Germans were swarthy. And when you look up the term swarthy, let me see something. Let me fact check that real quick. I believe I've seen it before. Did Benjamin Franklin say that the Germans were swarthy? Let's see what comes up. Yes, Benjamin Franklin said that the Germans were swarthy in his 1751 essay, where he grouped them with other Europeans like the French, Russians, and Swedes as having a swarthy complexion. He used this classification to argue against allowing too many of them to immigrate to Pennsylvania, fearing they would Germanize the colony rather than be Anglified. So now, swarthy, delete, meaning or definition. Swarthy means having a dark complexion, often with a dark-hued or tan skin tone. It is used to describe someone with a dark or dusky appearance and can also refer to a weather-beaten or olive-tone complexion, right? Which olive-tone complexion is brown or black, and there's no such thing as black people. There's no such thing as green people. You have green, brown, and black olives. There's no black people, there's no green people. So the only thing that's left is what? Brown. So olive complexion means brown skin. Definition, having a dark complexion. Synonyms, tawny, dusky, dark skin, brunette. So that just shows you, that there is evidence of this. But because it goes against the mainstream historians and scholars, they're not going to accept it. They're going to try to downplay it. That's why what's left today is strictly faith. As the name of the lesson is, all that's left today is mainly based on faith. All right. So let's see what else we can glean off here. It says McRitchie's work, for example, is critiqued as pseudoscience. See, and his methods have been widely discredited. Why? Because it doesn't fit the Edomite narrative today, the white supremacist narrative of today. Because how can they justify, the Heavenly Father, His Son, and the Israelites, and the angels being so-called white if history tells a different story? Paintings and mosaics tell the truth. The scriptures tell the truth. And then when you go to scriptures like, like Songs of Solomon, right? The first chapter, first thing they'll say is, well, that's really talking about a woman, the Shulamite woman. Well, that was King Solomon speaking of himself. You got to remember, this is poetic, but in poetry, you also use facts. Everything in poetry is not abstract. Everything in poetry is not symbolic. Everything in poetry is not a riddle. Some stuff is straightforward. And there's the instances where you speak in the third person, or you speak of yourself as if you're speaking about someone else. Because we used to read this Songs of Solomon 1 and 5. I am black but comely, O you daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. They'll say, well, no, that's talking about the Shulamite woman. But when you read the first verse, the Songs of Songs, which is Solomon's. Solomon is the author of Songs of Solomon. And he said that he's black but comely. Right? So let's look up this word black. The word is shachar. Shachar, right? Which means black. It doesn't really give you too much. Properly dusky. Then we read some of the synonyms of dusky. Synonyms, dusky, right here for swarthy. Right? It says, but also absolute, jetty, black. Right here. Black, use of hair, blackish color of the face. As in what? Canticles, which is Songs of Solomon 1 and 5. So this is actually talking about somebody who's black in their face or dark brown. Because King Solomon was dark brown, although his father was lighter. This is why it described him as Adamawanya or Admoni, as they say it. So it says, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar. When you look at the word Kedar, it goes back to the word Quadar, which was one of the sons of Ishmael. And you have a lot of those Ishmaelites that are dark. See right here, swarthy, right? Now when we come down here, it says Kedar, dark, son of Ishmael, the descendants of Kedar. Down here we read dusky, of the skin of the tent. Kedar, son of Ishmael, also collectively Bedouin, as his descendants or representatives. Right here, black skinned man. See? So the truth is out there, but these devils are not going to accept it. And even that word for in Jeremiah 14 and 2, where it speaks about Judah mourneth in the gates of language, they are black unto the ground. It even brings you back to this word. All right. And there's others. There's just one. This is just one example out of many. So let's go back. If you like, I can what the next question I put yes. I searched additional Europeans. Let's see, what else did I put down here? Because I did put J.A. Rogers. But let me see. Let me read a little bit of this, and we could get ready to close. So it asked me, if you like, I can dig into less well-known European antiquarian or folklorist works, 19th century or earlier, to see whether there are any more obscure historians who made claims similar to McRitchie's, even if they're considered fringe now. Would you like me to pursue that? Yeah, and then when you look up the word fringe or fringe writings, right? It means the term fringe writings refers to ideas, beliefs, or practices that are considered unconventional, extreme, or outside the mainstream. So just because they call it fringe, a fringe group or whatever, or fringe history or fringe whatever, or fringe writings, it's not accepted by the mainstream media. But that doesn't mean that or the mainstream historians, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. That's the point. So it says, I searched an additional European historian besides David McRitchie, who argued that Black or Moorish people ruled Europe in a broad sense, but I found very little credible evidence of recognized historians making such claims. Most of what does turn up falls into the category of fringe writings or internet memory rather than mainstream scholarship. Here's what I found and where the gaps remain. So you got to keep in mind about mainstream. Mainstream doesn't make it right. Mainstream is the Broadway, Broadgate. Mainstream definition: the ideas, attitudes, or activities that are regarded as normal or conventional. The dominant trend in opinion, fashion, or the arts. But that doesn't mean that the dominant opinion or the common opinion is the right opinion. You dig? So let's go back. It says, what I found. There is a modern online book titled The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by a Dr. John L. Johnson, which asserts that Black/Moorish dynasties ruled Scotland and the British Isles. And that's why we say a lot of those Scots, a lot of those Irish, British people, in the UK are Jakes. Malta, Sardinia. You had a 4,000 Jew Israelite soldiers that were part of the Roman Empire that were sent down to Sardinia. And this is why Sardinia, they have what? The Moorish, the Moorish, the flag had Moors, but then I believe it was a Sardinia. Sometimes you see the actual Moors, with the wide noses, Jake with the curly hair, and then sometimes you see them looking more, with the so-called Edomite phenotype. Why? Because they're whitewashing stuff. Why are you going to change it? If you are confident that you were the rulers of Europe and all that, why you got to keep changing shit? Why you got to take the depictions that were already there and whitewash them and destroy them and cut the noses off? If you are so confident that you were the actual rulers of Europe, that you are the Most High, that you are Yahushua, that you are the angels, that you are the Israelites, why do you got to keep lying? Why do you got to keep destroying credible sources? For example, claiming that Kenneth McAlpin, and I believe he might have been one of them. I don't know if he was one of them. 858 was Moorish. No, this is going into something else. Was Moorish or half black Piet. Piet is Prieto in Spanish. Prieto is black. And that his descendants were Negro Moorish blood. This, however, does not appear to be a work from an established historian. See, established historian, mainstream, but it's evidence. Evidence is evidence. Doesn't matter who it comes from. Evidence is evidence. So in order for you to really bring out any evidence, you have to have a prestigious title in this society. You got to be recognized. You got to have credentials of these devils that okay, so this guy, you can take him serious because he has his credentials. He went to the schools and he got his education from America or from England or whatever the case may be. But the Lord don't deal like that. He said he uses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. In the peer-reviewed academic tradition, and I found no indication of it being accepted by mainstream historical scholarship. Yeah, but we're not concerned with mainstream historical scholarship because it's the mainstream historical scholarship that got us to where we at, to the lies of where we at. No, the French philosopher Voltaire said, history is a lie commonly agreed upon. See? It evidently builds on McRitchie's ideas, but extends them into much stronger and more explicit claims of black rulership. Many websites and articles, example given, black kings and queens ruled parts of Europe for almost 700 years, claim that blacks or African descent rulers governed parts of Europe, particularly Iberia under the Moors from 711 to 1492. These are more popular audience or advocacy during pieces after than academic historians' works. But did they rule or not? Did they rule or not? Yeah. But you see how even like this shows you that the chat, is being controlled by somebody else because they're giving you facts. They're giving you truths. They're giving you evidence, but then they're throwing shade on it. They're throwing doubt on it. Well, yeah, this is popular. This is true. You had the Moors, which were black, that ruled the Iberian Peninsula. But it says these are more popular audience or advocacy pieces rather than academic historian works. It don't matter who it came from. Truth is truth. If you have a lawyer, a judge, and a bum that all see an event happening and they all give testimony, just because the bum is a bum and he doesn't have the prestigious titles of the judge and the lawyer doesn't mean that his testimony is false. But this is how Esau gets everybody. You have to be well established, well recognized in order for people to give you an audience or hear or believe what you got to say. The Lord don't work like that. The wisdom of this world is foolishness with the Most High. Works and tends to merge fact, example given, Moorish rule in Iberia with speculative and broad claims about racial identity and rule across Europe. Come on, man. A page titled "The Moors: What Impartial European Historians and Others Said" mentioned that McRitchie argued Moors, Maori, inhabited Britain and the British Isles. The page cites McRitchie's, but again, the broader claim of black people ruled Europe remains extremely limited in academic historical publications, right? Because they're not going to publish the truth. The truth has been hidden for a long period of time, but now it's coming out. So it says, what I did not find reputable European historians from the 19th or earlier 20th century, right? Reputable European historians that are accepted by the mainstream. Should have said that. Outside McRitchie. So McRitchie is an established authority when it comes to these histories, right? It says, who developed a sustained mainstream historical thesis that black people ruled Europe. See, in the sense of being the primary rulers across European nations over centuries. So they're going to try to downplay evidence, because it doesn't match the mainstream histories or the mainstream scholarship. I did not locate academic monographs or journals, articles, or recognize historians with archival work and peer review that support a broad black rulers of Europe narrative. Many of the claims I found are popular or internet derived, but not substantiated by rigorous historical evidence or peer-reviewed scholarship. But you do have scholars out there that spoke about this, just like you had actual eyewitnesses of Edward King, Viscount, right, and James Adair, that spent time with the Israelites here and came to the conclusion that these are Israelites, the 10 lost tribes. But that's not good enough because it's pseudo history. They don't regard it because it's not going along with the mainstream ideology. Summary: the only clear example I found is McRitchie, and that's not enough. But see how the devil does? The Johnson book and online articles build on similar ideas, but these are outside mainstream historiography, right? Mainstream historiography. And appear speculative, pseudo-historical. By who? By the mainstream media, by the mainstream historians. They're not going to tell you that it's true, because then now all the history books are going to have to be rewritten. And they're not going to do that. And that's why you have Trump on the campaign to destroy anything that makes America look bad, whether it was slavery or the stealing of this land, and threatening these different organizations with not giving them funding if they continue to push, these different articles and paintings and pictures that show the destruction of the Native Americans, the enslaving of Judah. It says, when you see claims that black people ruled Europe, often what is meant is more specifically African / or Arab Moorish rule in Iberia or individual figures of African descent in Europe. No, you have different paintings. What about the frescoes and mosaics and the paintings? What about the four emperors, the four tetrarchs? Four tetrarchs. Here we go. And where is this at? This is It says Basilica in Venice. Venice, let me see, location. Right, in Italy, Venice, Italy. And when you look at these images, you could clearly see that they're so-called black men, Israelites. Let me see. No, that's going to be a small one. Let me see if I can get a better or close-up. I want to get all four of them if possible. Open. See? Look at that. These are Jakes, broad noses that they broke off. That's a little dark. You can't really see it that good. This ain't in Iberia. This ain't the Iberian Peninsula. This is in Italy. Look at that. Why did you break up? I mean, you could see that this was actually chiseled off. The noses were chiseled off on purpose. You see the wide lips, the wide noses. You know? Here it is. You got these lineups here. Why come this wasn't broken off? If anything, the noses, which were wide here, they had more of a chance to withstand, you know, the weather and whatever, more than this little line right here. The crowns are perfect. They're not broken up. You know, the beard is perfect. It's not broken off. But somehow the nose just happened to be broken off. And this is not the Iberian Peninsula. This is not Spain, Portugal, and those areas up there. The British Isles and all of that. This is in Italy. And there are many others. Goddamn liars, man. So it says, rather than widespread black rule of European as well. If you're exploring this topic, shut up. All right, so I'm not going to go into this Jay Rogers, you know, because he brings out a lot of coats of arms and, you know, flags of the Moors and all that in different areas, and you know they give him credit for finding a lot of good stuff, but then you know they don't really because it's not accepted in the mainstream historian / scholar circles. Okay. So at the end of the day, what's left is faith. All that's left today is mainly based on faith. And that's why it says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. What is that? Hebrews 11 or Hebrews 6? I believe it's Hebrews 11. Let me get that real quick. Hebrews 11 and 6. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to the Most High must believe that he is Yahweh, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So you have a lot of people say, well, you guys believe in solely based off of blind faith. Well, what is faith? Faith is a belief. Faith is a belief without actual evidence. So what is that? Is that not blind faith? If something is a belief without evidence, what is that? That's a blind faith. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. All right. So all that's left today is faith, just like during the time of the Israelite foreigners, when they didn't have actually Yahushua there physically, they didn't see him. They didn't see when he walked. They didn't touch him. They didn't interact with him. So their part of the ministry coming into the ministry was based solely off of faith. All right. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. Till the next time we say, Shalom.